Okay, halfway home. We now move into an album that I'm not gonna lie, Matt. Besides the fact that it's one of the higher albums uh, critically that
Mm.
shows up on a lot of lists outside of the ones that we chose to look at, it shows up on pretty much all of those lists that are not the ones we chose to
Yeah.
use. And also, I knew a little bit about Steve Earle. Not a lot. I wanted to cover him, but I was like, this is a gift to Matt because
Yeah.
stylistically,
Yeah.
I knew this was going to be like honey for the proverbial bear. Before we get into that, though, why don't you go ahead and run the numbers,
So
Matt, and
yeah.
add the album? Yep.
Yep. So Guitar Town by Steve Earle comes in at number 510 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 49 in 1986, number 3,335 of all time. It is Steve Earle's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, and Steve Earle is ranked number 893 of overall artist rankings. Yeah, this is might be the only time we're covering him.
Yes.
Yeah, I've known Steve Earle for quite some time. I think the album that I first got of his was El Corazon, which came out in 1997 after he got out of prison. So Steve Earle
Yeah.
did serve some time in the Slammer.
Hmm.
I think it's drug. I think it was drug related.
And visited his heart. Is that why he did the El
El
Corazon?
Corazon, yes,
Hmm.
yes, that's the heart, yes. And my uncle introduced me to him, and so I really did like that record. I listened to his, I knew some of his, and then I heard some of his earlier stuff later on. I've seen
To
him live
clean
before.
to clean the stack, he was arrested for possession of heroin in 1993 and in
Mm,
1994 for cocaine and weapons possession. He was then therefore sentenced to a year in jail after he admitted possession and failed to appear in court.
yeah.
He was released from jail after serving 60 days of the 1 year sentence and went to an outpatient drug treatment
Oh, okay.
program. Hmm.
And he is the father of Justin Towns Earle, who actually recently passed away, sadly, from an overdose, I believe. So yeah, so there's some tragedy here. He was also in some of those David Simons. He was in The Wire and he was in Treme and stuff. So he's kind of been around different areas. So yeah, so Steve Earle is he's a country guy. He's like one of those outlawed country, kind of guys that brings together the country sounds as well as rock and roll. And it's something that the Americana, alt country movement, I guess he could be a part of as well. So I didn't know any of these songs. Full disclosure,
Me neither.
this was
I was a
all
true cold listen for me too.
yep,
Hmm.
all new to me. I knew, like I was thinking, like like maybe Copperhead Road's on this. It's not quite on the album Copperhead Road. I got another song called "I Feel All Right." That's a great song. I think that's on "I Feel All Right." so so
I'm sensing a theme.
I know. So like yeah, but I didn't know. Yeah, so none of these songs that I knew, and I love this stuff. It's very easy for me. This is something that I've kind of been into since the late '90s, and I like the mix here. He's got a very talk about with LL Cool J, like old school hip hop. There's an old school, this some of the country on here is old school country. This is like Hank Williams type country, or stuff that Elvis might have been playing as well. It's kind of stripped down,
Or the
um,
Ray Charles
or the Ray
songs.
Charles.
Rest,
Yep,
yeah,
because
even that era.
yep.
Yep.
So there's something about that, like that country guitar sound that's just not like the twangy kind of slide guitar sound, but kind of more the stripped down. it- You know, they're pluck. It's like almost like you're plucking, like don't, and then you've got this percussion that's happening in the background that's not really hitting a drum. It's almost just like the percussion is like the sticks hitting each other. So it's kind of a stripped down type of sound. But then he's got something. But then he's got he can bring it back to more of a rocking sound as well. And so there's definitely some, he can draw out the country twang on a song like Hillbilly Highway. He kind of does that country drawl. Um, and I, as I was listening to this record, I just thought, there's a fine line between the country that I like and the country that I don't like. And I found that like it has to do with almost, it's in a weird way. I don't know if there's any other music genre that's kind of like this, but a big part of it's kind of just an image and identity. Like Steve Earle, he's not like a big bucket hat, cowboy hat wearing, wearing boots and and that type of thing, like more of the Nashville pop
Well,
country
he's
sound.
very to the left
Well,
politically, which obviously
politically,
stands out. Yes.
correct. But it's not even, yes, that can stand out, but I wasn't even thinking that initially. It was more of just the image. He's just like a regular guy that has an appreciation for country music and rock and roll and kind of like America, like the theme of
But
America,
but
right?
what makes him different than the every guy country stars that like proliferated the late 80s and early 90s
Yeah.
in Nashville? Because wasn't that sort of the image of Garth Brooks
Yes.
and George Strait?
Alan Jackson and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and not
So
all those dudes were wearing cowboy. Is it just like, and that's what I was saying. Is it the politics? Is it the that he was 1 foot in Nashville and fought with them a
it's
little bit? Like what?
I don't know. I yes, I think it's also just the identity because, well, I would say the vocals, right? Like there's something about the vocals of some of those artists that you just mentioned and other like more of the popular country that as soon as they come on, it's almost like nails on a chalkboard for me.
Gotcha.
It's like it's got like there's a certain way of delivering. I mean, we talked again talking about delivering the way you're delivering the lyrics and the words. There's a certain way that you're doing that just kind of leaves me, it's off putting to me.
Well, because I feel the same way, and I won't get into this yet because you're there.
Hmm.
But I know the specific reason why I feel that way, and I do not believe it's why you feel that way.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right. Well, I'd be interested to hear that because I was really trying to parse it out because some of the stuff on here could be sung by one of those other artists that I might have heard in a coming out of a different from a different voice, from a different person that I might go, I don't like, I don't want to listen to this. And so I just found this interesting fine line. Yes, there's a political leaning here that's different. There's an image that's different. I like the way that he incorporates the rock in here more. I think it's more of a uh, maybe more genuine, or maybe it's a better melding of the two. I think, and I know
Well,
we've talked
he's
about. Go
he's a
ahead.
skilled craftsman at putting the rock in more,
Yes.
and is trying to have a rock. You could clearly tell he wants a little rock in it,
Yes.
in the way that maybe the Nashville folks are like, we need to keep that rock out, right? But
Or the rock that he's doing, like he's just better at it, right? Like it's almost like the country guys that try to throw the rock in there aren't as adept at doing so, right? Aren't as good, like for my ears anyway, right? I'm just
now
going by like what.
someone like Sturgill Simpson that doesn't throw the rock in, right? But sort of
He
has
can.
the
No, he can.
same.
No, he can throw the
Right, he
rock in.
can. Right, he
Yes.
can. Right, but is it like, is that another? Because he is another guy that
Yes.
famously is an everyman
Yes.
who sort of leans to the left in his politics, has his ups and downs with Nashville. Does he appeal to you
Yes,
too?
he does. Yep.
Then maybe it's the brand
I
for
think that
you,
that's,
Matt.
yeah. It's the brand is kind of there because and I feel in the one way I'm like, well, that's kind of dumb. Like if I just like something, I should like it. But there is something to be said about, because a lot of music is identity. Like how are you? We talk about this all the time. What's resonating with me? How does it make? Do I feel connected to this? And sometimes, a lot of times, most of the times, I would say it is the music. It's or the message. Perhaps if something's said in a certain way that's connecting with you, but it's also the image and it's the way that they're bringing things together that will resonate with you versus somebody else that might be doing something similar, but just in a way that's off-putting. Um, so that's kind of like that was like my main takeaway because there's a lot of country on here, And I remember when I first started getting into this stuff, this was a little bit of it was a barrier because as soon as I heard a slide guitar or a little bit of a country side, drawl, I'd be like, nope, not doing that, not going there. But I've learned over the years to appreciate a variety of different aspects of this and how it blends together with a lot of genres that I do like. So yeah, this is an easy one for me. I think there's some pretty ballad type songs on here. There is more rocking songs. There's more straight up country. And so yeah, I really like Steve Earle and I like this sound.
Yeah, I mean, I would go so far as to say this is a country album.
Yeah.
There's rock elements to it,
Yes,
but this
it's a
is
country album with rock elements. I would agree with that. Yes.
correct. And so this is this isn't alt country or words they try to use when it's like a rock album that has country elements. Even things like Sweetheart of the Rodeo or stuff that we saw that was countrified rock, right? This is country. Like to me, it's a pure country album. In that sense, we haven't done a lot of what would be called country, right? We've done the Johnny Cash live album, but that's a little bit of a gimmick in its own right because half of that is about being in the prison, right?
That's the story of that.
And
Yeah.
then
Right.
you've got Loretta Lynn and
Mm-hmm.
Dolly Parton that we covered, but that's coming from being a woman in country has always been different than a man in
Yeah.
country, right? And I feel like women in country, there's like a long heritage of them sort of being iconoclasts. There's some that play it straight by the book, but then there's others. And there's a male element to it too, but that male element has usually been like a rebel outlaw type guy.
Yes.
And Steve Earle, I mean, he's lived an interesting life, so maybe he does lean into that a little bit, but I think his edge is in a different way. I'll be very honest with you. The default country sound is not a natural
Mm-hmm.
yes for me. There's country I like, and so it's not a no, but you start with like you start down 0-1 in the count, so to speak, if I hear
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
And when you add in twang,
Yeah. Yeah.
you almost move to like 0-2 in the count. You could come back from it, but like you got to battle in the count, to use the baseball analogy, all
I
the way
like that,
out.
John. That's yeah. I can see
Yeah.
that. Yep.
And what I have come to learn is what allows country to come off the mat for me. And I think for a lot of people, country became palatable when it tied into pop, which they liked.
Mm-hmm.
And that did not do it for me.
Yep.
That, if
Right.
anything, that accentuated
Yes.
more of what I don't like
I
about
agree
it.
with that.
And
Yes.
so, like, I understand why that became so big, because it's like, let's take country and put this other thing in it that makes the count from 0-2 to like a hit. Right. And for people, it's pop, but that was not me. And yeah, I know you well enough to know it's not you. What takes it out for me is, do you have the lyrics? And
Mm-hmm.
boy, what saves country for me is if you can write clever or very profound songs in your own way. There's an art to writing a country song that's like both simple and profound at the same time, like allegory, storytelling, but a lot of country storytelling can be labored, or and then the mainstream is much more like, I'm in a small town, I like to have fun, like I love, it's very base to me, right? Base universal emotions, which is why I think people like it, but the universality is a negative for me.
Right. Like
What
going out
Steve
having cold beers and driving in your truck on a Friday
I
night
mean,
with
there's the
your
stereotype stuff
yeah.
like that, but it's also sort of like, I love you and I am happy we're married, and it's like, you done me wrong and I'm sorry. I don't want to just stereotype it to that, but just
Right.
sort of a very, it's like, just celebrating rural America, which, there's a barrier to that because I'm not of rural America.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think you have to be to understand it. And there's plenty of country. I loved, Coat of Many Colors. We did the Dolly Parton album. But what I loved about it wasn't that I needed to know what it was like to grow up in Appalachia, right? Like, because I don't. Like, what I liked about it was the cleverness of the lyrics
Yeah.
and the winking. And that is what save is the wrong word, but that is what pushes this album to a slight thumbs up for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because if this were just a music album, it would be a bridge too far. But when you've got songs like Fearless Heart and Someday, I mean, you've got excellent songs and choruses. And I'll use Fearless Heart as an example. Fearless Heart is a song kind of about, and I read a little bit about Steve Earle. He's been married, I don't know how many times he's been married. A lot. 4 or 5, something like
Yeah.
that. And like, he kind of writing autobiographically, like, listen, like, it's kind of like, it's not working out, but I still have a fearless heart, right? And because of that, I'm going to love you authentically. And so while it might be a negative that like I keep falling this way, it's also a positive because I give all, to it.
Yeah.
And in the wrong hands, that can be so schmaltzy and so
Mm-hmm.
unappealing. Or it could go the other way, where it becomes like a rebel cliche of like, the leader of the pack, like he's a bad boy, and you just roll your eyes at that too, right? But he manages to straddle that line between both. And really, what I find was by far the strongest part of this is he writes really good songs
Mm-hmm.
on this album across the board. And I was able to allow the lyrics and also his voice, even with the twang, it it hit no pun intended, it hit the right notes in terms of resonating with the material.
Yeah.
And so from that end of things, it does have a little bit of like the outlaw country in the sense that it's got a grittiness that seems real and authentic to me,
Hmm.
as opposed to just a creation of an image. And I know what you're saying, Matt, because this type of image appeals to me, and I think we have to be mindful of the fact that we might be a little bit biased to country music that doesn't totally buy into being fully country music, because we might have our own
Yeah.
biases towards what that means, right? Subject wise. And that's why I didn't want to go into like pickup trucks and beer, because that's a little minimizing, you know what I mean,
Sure.
while that's there.
Yeah.
But I do think this, knowing how you feel about Springsteen, right? And
Yeah.
people
Yes.
like that. I mean, he is writing in,
Someday is a Springsteen song. It
yeah,
sounds
he's
like, isn't it?
Someday's a
Yeah.
Springsteen song.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good Springsteen
Yeah.
song
Yeah.
actually, because I actually think his songs are better, like lyrically,
Yeah.
because he doesn't fall into the, the tropes, shall we
Hmm.
say, that I've. You can listen to any of my Springsteen things. I have the ultimate love-hate relationship with Springsteen. Like, half of his shtick I really appreciate, and half makes me want to put my hand in my mouth.
Yeah.
But Steve Earle writes Springsteen songs, but with a cred to it, right? And I think some of that's because he's writing about himself. Whereas Springsteen, has
Hmm.
that barrier of writing about Johnny and Susie and
Yep.
Sloppy Sue and everybody else down there, right? That kind of puts you at a detach. And so, yeah, do you think that he ties more, Matt, into the lineage of Springsteen and Bob Dylan and some of these writers you have that you resonate with, they can understand? Sure. I think for sure. And I
Yeah.
think that's a piece of what it is. And it probably doesn't hurt that, you're aware of him as like if you didn't know who Steve Earle was and you listened to this, I think you'd still like it. But I think the fact that you had like a year's head start also, if you were listening to this as a pure cold
Right.
listen, I wonder if you would have gotten
Oh
there as
yeah, no,
quick.
because because I went in going, I like Steve Earle, like, and I know other stuff that he's done. I have some of his other albums. I've seen him play live. I like, so I knew he would have to do something very different for me to be like, ugh, like I don't think he's really here yet,
Well,
like.
I also wonder if, like, because I wasn't as familiar with him,
Hmm.
because you knew the totality of his stuff, you didn't immediately go, you acknowledge it, right? But you didn't immediately go, "Oh, this is like clearly a country album." Because when I listened to this, I'm like, "Oh, this is a country album."
It was. I
Like
will say this.
without, yeah,
It's definitely more country than the stuff that I have. So there was a little bit of this is more country than what I'm used to him doing. But I was okay with it. It wasn't. It wasn't a thought that I kind of like, pined over for a while, being like,
like I
wow,
didn't
this is
even
surprising.
say this is alt country or rock country. Like I was like, "Oh, like he integrates rock in this in the same way that like
Yeah.
Paul Simon integrated reggae, right?" And mother child relate. It was there, but it was still Paul
Yeah,
Simon.
and
You
I've
know what I mean?
always
Doing
kind
that,
of
yeah.
like that
Mhm.
that term, like alt country, is all. Yeah, I sometimes think it's a misnomer. Like, and actually, I think you Sweetheart of the Rodeo is a good example of that too, because I actually think that I view that as more of a country record than an alt country
Yes,
record,
I
and
agree.
sometimes when that term almost seems like it's thrown out there to like lump in artists in the country genre that aren't part of the Nashville
or
country,
or to
pop.
give people listening to it an excuse that they're not listening to real
Right.
country, Matt. They're
Right.
listening to like a more intellectual,
Yeah.
which is why I've always hated that genre. 'Cause it's like, dude, if you want to add country elements, for Christ's sakes, add them in. Don't be an elitist, And that's where when people roll their eyes, just if you're going to roll the eyes at Nashville and say there's parts of this that it seems like an assembly line, right? You can't then also go and say,
But
well, I'm going to listen to something with country, but I'm not going to like fully
but
do
having but
country.
having said that, we were also just talking about how there is a differentiation between some of this this type of country versus that type of country, right? And you were saying like, oh, it's more in the lyrics, or what I was talking more about the image. But there's differences here, and there's overlap for sure, right? Like I
To
think
me, it's who's your audience.
yeah,
Country, Nashville country, and I hate to keep using that shorthand, but basically, like what's designed, it's very insular when you think of it. A lot of it is defined by what isn't Nashville country? And they sort of say, like, your job is to stay in our lane.
Mm-hmm.
More so than I think even pop music or rock, right? Like, I think it was easier to sort of bend those things. But the difference, I think, in the history of country, in this country since at least the mid 80s, right, has been the battle between the mainstream,
Mm-hmm.
signed off on, approved Nashville mainstream country,
Arena
and
country.
well, not even just arena. Like the song structure is largely the same. The themes of what you can write about are largely the same. What your album is supposed to sound like and what it's not supposed to sound like is the same.
Yeah.
And so when you think about it, the whole, to me, the narrative of country since the mid 80s has been who does that lane and how long they do it, and do you inevitably have a split with that if you decide to do it, whether you're Garth Brooks as Chris Gaines, right, or you're Taylor Swift trying to do
Mm-hmm.
more pop, or whether you're Steve Earle who's there but then you sort of add in some rock and maybe sing about some themes that are not there. The Dixie Chicks, you get political and
Yeah.
you push it. We're even seeing it now with what's her, Casey Musgraves, right? Is
Yep.
trying to then it's like, are you too
Yeah.
are you too sexy? Like there's a lot of that. Like what, and to some degree, it's always like for some people, country is how much you hew to that exact formula, and I just think that that is the definitive thing. Like, how close are you to Nashville country? Whereas there isn't a clearinghouse for hip hop or rock, right? Where it's like, this is what it's supposed to. You've always been able to have like 10 different rocks, right? Or
Yeah.
multiple different hip hops. But in country, it's like you're either doing the country sound or you're deviating
Yeah.
from it. And you're kind of allowed to make like one song, like as a novelty song.
Or crossover.
Yeah,
You're like
yeah,
teaming
like
up with like
you're
Lizzo
yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, it's like even that they struggled with, but it's like you're gifted like one of
Right.
these, especially if it's like a likable enough song. But you certainly are not going to record an album or do this all the time. It's sort of like we'll give you this one
Right.
thing just to show that we're good sports. But that's the thing. It's like you get that one and that's enough.
Yeah.
And then when you do more than that, you're done.
Now you're
So.
ostracized. Yeah. No,
Mhm.
that's a good point. There's a very it kind of there's that you're going to stay in your lane as much as any other genre, to remain in that genre as anything else, because it's yeah, because that's what the fans expect, and that's what they love, that's what they like. It's like that's for people like us, it's not really resonating.
Well, and
For
some
lots
of
of people,
that
it is.
some of that is the lifestyle, just like you
Mm-hmm.
identify, but the image you're saying is in definition or in opposition, I should say, to that. The people that identify with it, it's like, well, why wouldn't I like this? This
Right.
speaks exactly to my norms and values.
Right.
And some people might be like, that's the problem. And they're like, no, the problem is that you think that's the
Right.
problem. And there you go. Yeah.
Well, but yes, but it's also like if, and I would say that's it's not just for country fans. I mean, there's plenty of other fans. It's like people. I think it's for some people, it's human nature. I know what I like. I'm gonna stick with this thing because it's familiar and it's safe and it's something that I like and I don't have to think too much. It's fun, it's enjoyment, and I just want to do that rather than trying to be like I want to explore different things or hear something else or learn more about things. And some people are going to be more prone to that than others. So that's always going to be there. But yeah, I think you are onto something. It's for maybe for a number of like more of the pop country, if you don't like the term Nashville country, it's more of a pop kind of a thing. It's more of a mass appeal. That's what I was saying, like the arena country, because that's what some of those artists will sell out like amphitheaters and stadiums and stuff like that.
Well,
But
and part of the thing too, Matt, is that me, you, Josh, all have our biases towards certain sounds,
mm-hmm.
and to some degree, it's we're not going to lie to people, so it's kind of like, are we able to overcome them, or is the reality like we're not able to overcome them? You just kind of heard that both Matt and I have a little bit of a bias against twangy mainstream country, right? Like Josh pretty clearly does not like that discordant noise, like is like a carnival type sounds, right?
That's
Because
right.
it's like
Yeah.
Matt hears ska and it's a hard barrier for him, right? And we start stripped out. So there's things. So the question then is like, is there a thing of this where we don't intellectualize it and we just sort of admit to what we just said,
Right.
that within this subgenre, yeah, we're either the basics because we're a sucker for it not being creative, but in this we're willing to do it because we just like the way it
Yeah.
sounds, or is there a covers thing? It's like, if I'm being honest, I'm really not doing the intellectual legwork to understand the variation in this because I don't want to, because
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Right.
And then, or are we always going to be able to, or are we just not in some areas? And I don't know if we've ever gotten to a definitive point. Matt, would you say that we shut the door on anything yet? But I don't rule out that we might.
No, because even some of that stuff that I that we talked about. Me not liking Scott. There's been some stuff on here. I'm like, yeah, actually, that wasn't too bad. Like, there was some stuff on the Fishbone record that, I mean, it's not straight up Scott, but there are Scott elements there that I liked, and and things like that. I think that you kind of were, the industrial or the electronic stuff. There were some things within New Order or Nine Inch Nails that you liked.
Oh, there's
So
emerged an industrial and electronic that I like. So
sure,
I was able to find out not only can I do it, but there's actually stuff that I didn't yet try that hard
right.
with. Now, if you said like Euro techno, I think I'm starting to learn more. Like, okay,
The different
maybe it's
types,
not
yeah.
like this, but like the Euro techno that doesn't have, I know doesn't. Would that be the bridge too far? Where I'm like, you can give me 50 albums of this, and just there isn't gonna be something. Um, I keep wondering if there's something that's a closed door for me like
Mm,
that. So
yeah,
yeah,
death metal.
for you,
Yeah,
yes.
I don't think I could ever get down to death metal, but
Well, unless you expand your idea, right? And
right,
like,
unless
say we
yes,
listen to Slayer or like Slipknot, right? Or different. Maybe okay, this is
death
you don't.
metal
Yeah,
adjacent.
yeah,
Yeah,
hmm
so maybe I just haven't found it yet, but that
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
um,
So we'll see. But I
mhm,
know this is a very esoteric
I know.
conversation right here. But that's, I mean, when you get Matt and Josh, that's going to be or excuse me, Matt and Josh, Matt and John. I'll give myself in there. Matt and John.
That's
That's
what
kind
we're
of the
gonna do.
conversation you're going to get. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well,
you want to
I'm
find
thumbs
find
up
it
on
this.
this on the Steve Earle Guitar Town for the country element. Yeah, it's pretty country. I would agree with you on that, John. It's more country than rock for sure.
I am thumbs in the middle
Okay.
because if it was just music, I and fully accounting for bias of it, I'd say slight thumbs down. It just didn't do enough for me to draw me in or transcend the genre of what I've heard before. But I think it moves into the thumbs in the middle, maybe even slight thumbs up, because I think the quality of the songs here are good. And I compared a little bit to, I didn't know Steve Earle, and so I wasn't surprised by it. But it had a little bit of effect where, like the John Mellencamp thing, where I'm like, these
Yeah.
are stronger lyrical songs than I would have thought, even though the music itself didn't, reinvent the wheel or move me in some ways.
Right.
But with that being said, these are stronger lyrical songs than even the John Mellencamp songs
Yeah.
are, in my opinion. And we did Scarecrow for those that might be listening. So yeah, I'd say slight thumbs up, carried heavily by the lyrics.
Mm.